Alright, so chapter 15, we are going to discuss allocation some more. This particular chapter, we have been discussing allocation of cost. And allocation of indirect cost is an area of constant discussion in many companies, with division, department, and product managers often questioning the amount of indirect cost allocated to their respective sections. This particular chapter discusses allocation of support department cost using several different methods. This chapter presents the concept of the direct method, the step-down method, and the reciprocal method. We are also going to see a standalone method and an incremental method. And these are methods for allocation of cost. We will also talk about the concept of how do we break out and allocate revenues when we're talking about bundled products. So for example, what if we sell a customer a TV and a VCR as a pair for a price? How much of the revenues are going to get allocated to the television, and how much of the revenues would get allocated to the VCR or DVD player? Alright, so we're going to be talking about those kinds of concepts here in chapter 15. So allocation of support department costs, common cost, and revenues. It is very important that you guys grasp these allocation issues. I'm going to start off with showing you the single rate and the dual rate. Make sure you understand those before you move further into allocating costs to the service departments. Alright, so we've got several learning objectives for this chapter. Number one, we're going to distinguish between the single rate method and the dual rate method. We will understand how the choice between allocation based on budgeted and actual rates differs, and between budgeted and actual usage, and how those can affect the incentives of division managers. We will allocate multiple supporting department costs using the direct method and the step-down method and the reciprocal method. And we're going to talk here in just a moment about what is a support department and what is an operating department or a production department. Number 4, we are going to allocate common cost using the standalone method and the incremental method. And we will also explain the importance of explicit agreement between contracting parties when the reimbursement amount is based on cost incurred. Recall that I mentioned in chapter 14 we were going to be looking at some governmental type of issues. For example, Department of Defense contractors and those kinds of folks. They expect to get reimbursed for some of their underlying costs when they do these government contracts. And we'll talk about that in this chapter. Number 6, we're going to understand how bundling of products causes revenue allocation issues and the methods that managers can use to allocate those revenues. Alright, so chapter 15, you guys do have lots of little calculations to learn how to do. Understand the wording, understand the formulas. It's not that bad. Just focus on the multiple different ways of doing things. I would highly recommend that you make flashcards or something. Alright, so allocating cost of a supporting department to operating departments. Companies can distinguish between an operating department and a support department. Alright, so what is an operating department? An operating department can also be called a production department. And these are departments that specifically add value to the product or the service that we are supplying our customers with. A support department, on the other hand, also commonly referred to as a service department. These support departments or service departments provide support and assist other departments by what it is that they actually do. So let me give you a couple of examples here. All right, so if we're talking about the operating department or a production department, we could be talking about the manufacturing department. What about the support or service department? We're talking about maintenance or IT. Those are service or support departments, okay? So maintenance would support the manufacturing department by taking care of their machinery. The IT department would help set things up properly for other departments. All right, so support departments can support not just operating departments, but they can also support other support departments. And we'll talk about how to allocate all these kinds of costs in this particular chapter. All right, so how a company allocates its overhead and its internal support cost, which those costs are related to marketing, advertising, and other internal services, among its various production departments or projects, can have a big impact on how profitable those departments or projects are. Okay, so the people that these costs are going to be getting allocated to are very concerned with how they're going to receive those allocations. Again, an operating or production department directly adds value to a product or service, where a support or service department provides the services that assist other internal departments, operating departments, and other support departments within the company. Managers face two questions when allocating the cost of a support department to the operating departments or divisions. Number one, should the fixed cost of a support department be allocated to the operating divisions? Yes or no? And number two, if those fixed costs are allocated, should the variable cost and the fixed cost of the support department be allocated in the same manner? All right. In regards to how we go about allocating, we can use different bases. Under each method, allocation of support costs can be based on one of the three following scenarios. We can allocate based on budgeted overhead rate and budgeted hours. We could also do it based on budgeted overhead rate and actual hours. We can even do it on an actual overhead rate and actual hours. All right, so we've got all kinds of information that we can gather, some of it more time consuming and therefore more expensive than others. For example, gathering actual overhead dollars and the actual hours is way more time consuming than using our budgeted overhead rate and our budgeted hours. All right, so when using either method, managers can allocate support department cost onto operating divisions based on either a budgeted rate or the eventual, at the end of the period, actual cost rate that can be calculated. The latter approach is neither preferred nor widely used. Therefore, we're going to use or illustrate budgeted rates. And I am using examples from the text, so you can feel free to follow along once we get going. All right, so let's take a look first at what's called the single rate. It's fairly easy. The single rate method does not distinguish between fixed cost and variable cost. We literally lump the two together, and then we allocate the cost in that cost pool, or where those two costs have been gathered, and use the same rate per unit of the allocation base. A support department would be an example of a cost pool. Okay, so we're going to get all of the fixed cost of that support department and all of its variable costs that we feel are going to get utilized during the period. We're going to add those two numbers together. So let's take a look at the example that's in the text. And this is the 15th edition textbook. Practical capacity. This particular support department, which we are looking at the materials management department. They are a support department, and they supply materials to the machining department and to the assembly department. These two are operations department. The practical capacity of the materials management department is 4,000 hours for the period. They expect their fixed cost for the period to be $144,000. And that $144,000 is the fixed cost at a relevant range of 3,000 to 4,000 labor hours. The budgeted usage of the underlying departments can be calculated in advance. The machining department estimates that they're going to need 800 hours of the materials management time, and the assembly department budgets that they believe they're going to need 2,800 hours of the materials management department's time. All right, so if we add those two up, we get a total of 3,600 hours. Again, this is within our range of 3,000 to 4,000 labor hours. We have a budgeted variable cost for the materials management department on a per hour basis. And this variable cost is $30 per hour. It too has been estimated to be $30 per hour based on the relevant range. Actual usage hours for the scenario we're looking at, machining actually uses 1,200 hours, and the assembly department used 2,400 hours. Okay, so notice here the machining department is using 400 more, and the assembly department has actually used 400 less. All right, so our total hours still is the same. However, look at the changes between what was budgeted usage and what was actual usage. I also want you to notice that we have a relevant range of 4,000 on the high end, and again, the practical capacity of 4,000 hours. Okay, so notice right off the bat, folks, we have not used 400 hours worth of the material management department's time. All right, let's take this information right here and go do the single rate method. All right, so the single rate method, we're going to take the budgeted usage, the 3,600 hours, 800 of which was budgeted for the machining department and 2,800 budgeted to the assembly department, and we're going to use that as our allocation rate, or not our rate, but our allocation usage. All right, the budgeted total cost for fixed cost, we just saw this, was $144,000 for the materials management department. If we take that and add that to 3,600 hours, which is the budgeted usage hours, at $30 an hour, taking that 3,600 and multiplying it times $30 per hour, taking that dollar amount and adding it to 144,000, we get a total amount for $252,000, which is our budgeted total cost. We're then going to take that $252,000 and we're going to divide it by the whole 3,600 hours that's budgeted. And we're going to get a $70 single rate per hour of use. And then based on the usage, we will allocate. Alright, so for each hour of actual use, we will allocate $70 per hour to the operating departments. So the actual hours of the machining department was 1,200. Therefore, 1,200 times 70 equals 84,000. And then the assembly department had actual hours of 2,400. We multiply that times 70, we get 168,000. All right, so again, notice this is a single rate. We take our budgeted total fixed cost for the period. We add it to the budgeted hours at the budgeted rate for variable cost and come up with a total amount that we believe we are going to incur for the period. And then we divide that by the budgeted hours to give us a single hourly rate to use. All right, and this is going to be our budgeted rate, but we're going to allocate it based on actual hours used. There are advantages and disadvantages to the single rate method. Of course, it's less costly to implement. There's not a lot of information that we have to really gather. We do have to track actual hours, but other than that, it's fairly easy to calculate and, of course, allocate over. Advantage number 2, it does offer the user departments some operational controls over the charges they bear. Disadvantage, though, is it may lead operating department managers to make suboptimal decisions that are in their own best interest but may be inefficient for the organization as a whole. Let's now go take a look at the other one, the dual rate method. The dual rate is going to take our information and we're going to partition it into 2 separate rates. All right, so we're going to gather those costs of the support department, but we're going to break them into 2 different pools, a variable cost pool and a fixed cost pool. And then we're going to come up with rates for variable cost and rates for fixed. And then we're going to allocate those out. All right? We will allocate each pool using a different cost allocation base. Again, using the same exact data. We've got budgeted usage of 3,600 hours. 800 is budgeted for machining. 2,800 was budgeted for the assembly department. Our variable cost is $30 per hour. We have 3,600 hours budgeted. Okay, so let's take 3,600 hours times $30 an hour. But we're going to use this on a per hour basis, okay? Budgeted total fixed cost, a separate pool, $144,000. We need to come up with an hourly rate for the fixed cost. Okay, so we're going to take the $144,000 and divide it by the budgeted hours. 144,000 divided by 3,600 hours budgeted means $40 per hour for fixed cost, where variable cost is $30 per hour. Notice here, people, we have 2 separate rates. One is 30 for variable, one is 40 for fixed. We're not adding these 2 together for a single rate. We're not going to do that. We are going to allocate based on actual use for the variable, but on budgeted use for the fixed. Okay, so you've got a little tweak there. So the machining department had 800 budgeted hours. That's what we're going to use for the fixed cost. So 800 times the 40 gives us 32,000 for fixed cost, goes to the machining department. And for their variable costs, they use 1,200 actual hours at $30 an hour equals 36,000. Adding those two together, machining department gets $68,000 allocated. What about the assembly department? Again, budgeted hours are used times the fixed cost rate, giving us a total of 112,000. And then the actual hours is what's used for the variable cost, giving us a total of 72,000. If we add that up, we get 184,000. Dual rate method has its advantages and disadvantages. Advantage number one, it guides the department managers to make decisions that benefit both the organization as a whole and each department. And it helps us in allocating fixed cost based on budgeted usage, which helps user departments with both short run and long run planning, because user departments know the costs that are going to be allocated to them in advance. Disadvantage: requires managers to distinguish between variable cost and fixed cost, which is often a challenging task. And number two, it does not indicate to the operating managers the cost of fixed support department resources used, because the fixed costs are allocated based on the budgeted rather than their actual usage. And number three, we allocating fixed cost on the basis of budgeted long-run usage may actually tempt some managers to underestimate what their planned usage is going to be. And that can be very, very detrimental to an organization if those service departments do not have a good game plan to work by, and if they are insufficient in supporting those operating departments, it would be very bad for the organization. We're going to take a look at another way to utilize this calculation, but this time I want you to notice that this is our third approach, and what we're going to be doing is allocating fixed cost on the basis of what is called practical capacity. Alright, so this approach is going to charge each division with services actually used, and in addition, variations in actual usage in one division will not affect allocations in other divisions. But most notably, the cost of unused capacity of these support departments is going to be highlighted, okay, because it's not allocated to divisions. Generally, it is found to be preferable to allocate our fixed costs based on capacity. Under this approach, that fixed costs provide capacity and variable costs are allocated based on actual usage. So I'm going to show you using capacity and the single rate method, and capacity and the dual rate method. All right, so same scenario. We have 3,600 hours budgeted usage, 800 for machining, 2,800 for the assembly department. We need to calculate a rate. Now remember, we're going to have a rate for variable and a rate for fixed, and we're going to add the two together, and that's the rate we're going to use. But what I want you to notice that's different here is that we're going to use not the budgeted usage, but the practical capacity. All right, so 4,000 hours are available. We're not using the budgeted 3,600 hours. We're going to use what's available. So 144,000 divided by that 4,000 in practical capacity means the fixed cost portion is 36 per hour. We still have the same variable cost at 30 per hour, We're going to take these two now and add them together, which gives us 66 per hour for our single rate, considering practical capacity. And then we are going to multiply that out times our actual hours used, and we're going to get 79,200 for the machining department and 158,400 for the assembly department. Now, what is this going to highlight to us? We have got 400 hours that have not been used of the department capacity. So there's 400 hours difference. Okay? Now, 400 hours difference in actual hours too, because recall our actual hours also equaled 3,600, even though the makeup was different than what was originally budgeted. Okay, so this is still 3,600 hours actual. So we've got 400 hours not used. Therefore, we are able to highlight that 400 hours were unused at a fixed cost rate of 36, means we've got $14,400 worth of fixed cost that we've covered that has not been utilized. Alright, let's take a look at the dual rate method considering our practical capacity. Alright, same data set. We still have the $30 per hour in variable cost. We have a budgeted total fixed cost of $144,000. Again, $144,000 divided by the 4,000 hours does still give us the $36 hourly rate for the fixed. But under this method, we are going to charge each hour of actual use for the variable cost, just like what we've been doing. But we are going to use the budgeted for the fixed. Okay, so how many hours were budgeted? Alright, so machining, 800 at 36 for the fixed gets 28.8. Actual hours used times the variable cost equals 36,000. Total to the machining department, 64,800. And then what about our assembly department? They have 2,800 budgeted hours at the 36 fixed, gives us 100,800. And then our variable cost, we had 2,400 actual hours at $30 per hour to give us 72,000, giving us a total of 172,800. Again, we can still notice that we have got those 400 hours that have not been utilized at a cost of 36 per hour for 14,400.